Good day, all of you. Myself, Anchal, welcome you all on behalf of the Advertisement Club of Shri Shankarlal Sundarbai Shasun Jain College for Women to today's workshop. As we all know, today's workshop is about media as a catalyst for clean and sustainable power generation. So before we begin, let us take the blessing of Almighty through our prayer.
Sir, can you please stop sharing the screen?
Thank you, ma'am. Warm greeting to the guest of our day, Dr. Bhaskar Tripathi. I now call Vamsi Kapilwali, Senior Researcher CAG, to please address us about Dr. Bhaskar Tripathi. Sir, you are on mute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anshul, for the welcome note. Before I get into the topic, I will just give an idea about why we are doing this and what we will be discussing in the presentation. Like any other state in India, Tamil Nadu principally relies on coal for its energy production. Burning of coal for energy is a significant source of air, water, and land pollution. And as our energy requirements increase, our dependence on coal also increases. And this is a major contributor to the climate change, which raises the vulnerability of Tamil Nadu and other Indian states to frequent natural disasters and extreme weather events. And Tamil Nadu being a coastal state with nearly 1,000 kilometers of coastal line, the climate change emergency is more manifested here, and it's imperative to take informed decisions. And we have different stakeholders have different roles to play in taking these informed decisions. And Tamil Nadu on its part has its solar policy in 2019, where it has proposed a target of 9,000 megawatts of renewable energy generation by 2023. And a recent study, which is led by Climate Horizon, suggests that the recovery of financial debts can, like Tangentco, which is main power generation company in Tamil Nadu, they can, through giving up coal, they can save around 35 crores by 2025, which is huge amount in terms of energy transition. And looking at the financial aspect as well as to the environment benefits, a rapid transition to renewable energy will improve financial, social, and environmental conditions in Tamil Nadu. As being discussed widely, renewable energy growth has potential to limit the unsustainable development which we are seeing through fossil fuels. And realizing the need to enhance environment protection, the state government last Friday has announced 3 big initiatives, which are Tamil Nadu Climate Change Mission and Tamil Nadu Wetlands Mission and Green Tamil Nadu Mission with a substantial budget allocation. Where this whole budget will focus on climate change adaptation and mitigation activities which will be headed by the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. in terms of climate change, the second week of August was a big week for climate change news, as the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change published its latest report. And it had found that, which is already established fact, that climate change is a human-induced and humanity is in for a century with more extreme weather events and glaciers if we don't take measures now. And almost 60% of oil and gas and 90% of coal must stay in the ground in order to stop these extreme events being taking place and restricting the global warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade. And in this all things, there is an important stakeholder along with other people is also media. And most media outlets in India covered the main findings of the IPCC reports as well as explaining what the report is. However, is the coverage sufficient? Just 2 years ago, a report found that the overall coverage of climate change by Indian media is very little. And the report also indicated that the public concern about climate change was largely informed by media consumption. Therefore, how the media frames climate change really matters. And public concern about climate change is important for climate change to become a bigger part of national conversation, along with what's causing it, which is the burning of oil, gas, and coal. And we can say just to stay, climate change is the first step. And then from there, it's where you need to start having the conversation of, well, who is responsible and what is responsible and what is it or not being done to mitigate these problems or address these problems is what media should be highlighting. And since 2007, the media has actually advancing the facts around climate change impacts. And since 2009, both public awareness and press dissemination has seen a global surge. Is it sufficient? That's a question mark. While the media of global north widely covers perceptions of risk and questions of responsibility, including issues of mitigation, adaptation, justice, and equality, many such issues are still underreported by journalists of global south. This could be due to mix of many reasons, which is lack of capacity, lack of data, and the training to cover the intricacies of climate science and policy, as well as the access to clear, timely, and understandable climate-related resources. And the other very important thing is also the hesitancy to connect the extreme weather events to climate change by this network is also one thing which we should look into. And at this point of time where we are at a critical stage of climate change, these hesitancy to connect extreme weather events by the media is also a tactics by the fossil fuel industry to make climate change a third rail and making it confusing to cast a doubt among the normal people. So, as recently one of the chief minister of Maharashtra has said, the climate change is here and it's in our backyards. We are living with extreme climate risk every day, and the window for acting on climate change is closed on us, and we must act now. So, to discuss this, what role the media plays and how, especially the media, should talk about the climate change and the role media can play in order to engage more people on the issue of climate change, and how to tell the story of climate crisis and tell it accurately. Today we have Mr. Bhaskar Tripathi with us. Mr. Bhaskar Tripathi, for the last 9 years, has specialized in development journalism, writing on climate policies, environment, energy, and their intersections. His work on climate change mostly revolves around understanding the impact on marginalized, the geopolitics of climate change, and climate finance. In the past, he has worked with Land Conflict Watch, India Spin, Dawn Connection, and Hindustan Times. His articles are regularly published in India's leading publication, including Business Standard, Bloomberg Quint, Scroll, and Reddit. In 2014, he was named one of the best young journalists from developing countries. And in 2019, he was awarded the Young Environment Journalist of the Year. So now, without much delay, I would like to invite Mr. Bhaskar Tripathi to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Vamsi. First of all, I'm just simply a journalist and no doctor, so let's not use that term for me because I don't deserve it yet. About what Vamsi spoke about, the premise of this conversation, we will eventually discuss several aspects of it. But what I wanted to start with was just establishing some basic grounds. So let's say for next 15-20 minutes, we will try and understand. I'm sure you guys are already aware of what climate change is, how it's impacting our daily lives, and what are the solutions around it, which are emerging across the world. But I still want to just glean over them once, and then I will start addressing some questions that I, as a journalist, on daily basis confront with. And of course, you guys are journalism students. You eventually will go on, join newsrooms, and all of you who will start reporting on climate related issues will face these questions eventually. And these questions go beyond what are current markets around climate change. These questions go beyond what do we immediately need to do to address climate change, because that's a policy issue that will happen. There will always be a market. The market will influence politics, and politics will take care of it. What I wanted to talk about more is the global conversation around climate change, which as journalists reporting from developing countries, and most of the time, just because of the lack of understanding and comprehension of the global issues, we tend to miss on. And the most important point that I will keep referring to again and again through my next 20 minutes is about equity. Where do we stand as a growing country? Where does Bangladesh or an African country which is least developed stands in this debate? Understanding these perspectives, standing by these countries as a journalist, writing about their perspective is, I feel, is pertinent because nobody else is doing so. Right now, most of the conversation around climate change in Indian media and all the stories, most of the stories that are coming out are driven by the market, which is propagated by the developed world investments. There are usually you would find, if you just introspect of the content that we're reading around climate change, you would realize that it's mostly what developed countries want developing countries to do. But then there are realities of us. There are realities of these small developing countries. They need the space to grow. They want to use the coal because it's cheap right now. I mean, not now. Solar has sort of has been competing strong, but so coal for a very long time has been the cheapest source of energy to provide electricity to millions of people and grow an economy. What all the developing countries across the globe have been demanding from the developed world is this: you caused climate change. When you industrialized your economies for the past 200-300 of years, your emissions accumulated in the atmosphere and increased the overall temperatures and caused this global warming. Now you want us to stand shoulder to shoulder in addressing this problem, but we don't have the capacity to do so, simply because our economies are not of that scale. We still have millions of poor infrastructure, bad infrastructure, roads to construct, feed people. Just basic SDG goals are so enormous for some developing countries that addressing their climate action of mitigation and adaptation becomes a distant dream. So I think with this premise that I've just established, let's start with the presentation. It's not more of a presentation, but merely some points that I had scribbled, so all of us, you and I, can discuss this. And I am no expert. I will not speak in language that an expert would speak in. I would just simply throw questions at you that I grapple with, and we all can just take these thoughts with us and start reading on them, if any. So do keep taking notes, because the presentation might not be of a lot of help, because those are just highlights. But do keep noting the terms that I might speak, the concepts I might introduce, and read about them. They'll really help you going forward. Eventually, towards the end of this PPT, I'm hoping that we can also one-on-one talk about as a journalist who's been trying to figure his way out in this industry to report on climate. And of course, you new aspirant budding journalists, all of you who are just going to enter the market, and you would of course have a lot of question about jobs, and if there are jobs for reporters covering climate change. We can obviously towards the end discuss that as well. For next 20 minutes, I'm just going to take you through a journey that I feel was really important for me, improving myself as a reporter. I'm just going to start my presentation. Just give me a second. Is my screen visible?
Yes, now it is here.
Okay. So yeah, what is climate change? There are basically the terms that we usually use. There's a science of it. I mean, it's not like I'm judging your information on climate change. I'm just simply wanting to, as I said, glean through some of the information. So climate change is gradual change in the global temperature caused by accumulation of greenhouse gases. And let's assume that you have what we usually do to trap our body heat in winters. We take a blanket and it traps all the heat inside. Now imagine this in a catastrophic scale. These gases which are accumulated in our atmosphere are now functioning as a blanket. Not only this, continuously absorbing infrared radiation, they're making Earth's temperature warmer, increasing the temperature in parts which are warmer, and of course going on different extremes and decreasing the temperature which are colder. So we're seeing both the spectrums. Some part of the world are experiencing extreme cold temperature, some part of the world are experiencing extreme warm temperature, and we as in India are towards the warmer side of the world. Now, so this is why it's mostly, we also use global warming as a term, but climate change is more accurate a term to use. Some media organizations, for example, Guardian, have redone their style sheet whenever they write about stories on climate change. And they started saying that the climate change is here. The immediate effects of it are being experienced by the population all over the globe. So we not call it climate change because according to them, it doesn't speak to the immediate nature of this problem. So now whenever they have to write climate change, they use the term climate emergency, just to show the immediate impact of it on the population and show the immediate nature of these stories. So these are not the stories that will happen in 20 years down the line, 50 years down the line. Climate change is here, it's impacting our lives now, and it's an emergency that the world governments need to address. Impacts of climate change, how climate change is impacting. I mean, I have written down, of course, some point, but let's just talk about India. We're experiencing wildfires. All of us are reading news about landslides happening, cloudbursts happening, floods, droughts, extreme temperatures crossing 50 degrees Celsius marks in parts of Rajasthan, heat waves, and erratic nature of rain. All of these are some way or the other influenced by the temperatures that are fluctuating. The parts which are becoming colder, the part of the world which are becoming warmer are just messing up with this global system of temperatures and affecting the weather all over. So it's not, again, I think usually what happens is that I somehow feel that Indian media is still talking about climate change as a distant future. It's here. You and I both are experiencing the impacts of it. Some of you and some of us are privileged enough to live in our concrete houses with ACs to avoid the impacts. But then there are less privileged, poor people who can't afford, who can only afford kacha houses, who don't have the means, financial means, and the resources to save themselves, so they die of heat waves. because there is no way for them to afford a fan, an AC, or electricity. So there is also one concept about climate change that you and I need to understand. Climate change is a problem caused by rich countries, rich people. It's a consumption problem. But the impacts are largely viewed on people who are poor. And that's a very unjustified nature of this problem. Because US has been emitting its carbon for 200 of years. It's still going to emit till 2050 because that's where net zero goes. But people in Asia, people in India, poorer states, Bihar, Odisha, people are dying of heat waves because they don't have the means and the energy and the resources to save themselves. That's where the government comes in. But let's not kid ourselves. Governments have more immediate priorities around elections than to address climate change as the primary motive. So yeah, climate change is here. It's happening. As Vamsi said, it's in our backyard. It's happening right now. We can choose to ignore using our resources, but there are people who can't choose to ignore it. Now comes the journalism part. So from here on, as I said, I will keep throwing concepts and questions at all of us who are present here, and we need to ponder on this. First is, who's responsible for climate change? It's a very basic question. In the climate change debate, in the politics of it, who has caused climate change? It's the developed world which has caused climate change. For over 200, 300 years of their industrialization journey, they produced enormous amounts of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, which are now trapped in our atmosphere and warming the world. So there's a concept of historical responsibility. And when the political debate about climate change started, the first landmark thing happened in 1992. In Rio, a convention between the group of most of the countries was signed. It was called the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. We also call it UNFCCC. Now, this 1992 convention said a couple of major things. First, it said in written text that developed world, and it put them in annexure 1. They put all the countries into 2 annexures. Annexure 1 countries, annexure 2 countries. Annexure 1 countries are mostly the developed world. They said that the developed world has caused climate change. They are the historical emitters. They are historically responsible for climate change. Then they said, because they are historically responsible, so they need to cut their emissions immediately till 2015, 2020, and provide and left enough carbon quota. Let's assume that we only have 100 units of carbon, and developed countries, because they were advanced, their economies were advanced, they've already used 80% of it so far. And now comes developing countries like India and or smaller countries, which are still growing. They are only left with 20 units of carbon to grow their economy with. So the debate is, which country should own how much carbon, should consume how much carbon to be able to grow. And here comes the part of equity. The convention said that the developed countries have already polluted the atmosphere enough. They need to cut back their emissions so that there is space for developing countries to let's just say emit more carbon and be able to reach a point where they can afford climate action and at least grow their economy, because cheap fuel, which is fossil fuel, is needed for their economies. And then the conversation kept drifting, and in 2015 we had another major accord, which was the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement again repeated most of the same thing. It said developed countries are responsible. They need to cut their emissions immediately. They need to peak their emissions, and from there on they need to start declining their carbon emissions, GHG emissions. They can't emit anymore. But the reality is developed countries continue to emit their emissions, And even the countries which were supposed to peak their emission by 2030 and start declining are now announcing net zero goals by 2040, 2050. So they're again not only circumventing these accords by these trickery of net zero, they're buying more time to emit. And at the same time, they're also pressurizing developed countries like India and all the other major economies, growing economies, that you also announce net zero. That questions one principal concept of politics of climate change, which was spoken about in 1992 convention as well as the Paris Agreement. The principle called common but differentiated responsibility. All the countries in these two conventions and accords have agreed that nobody can force a country to do something forcefully. You can't tell India to forcefully just stop using its coal, go cold turkey, and not grow its economy. A country will only do for climate change as much as its native conditions, its native conditions of economy, jobs, poverty allow it to. And that's where the concept of NDCs, nationally determined contribution, came in existence, because countries said that we, with our current realities, can do this much. Now, India, with its current reality, has done much more than it had promised, and it's on the track of overachieving its concepts, overachieving its targets. India wanted to deploy around less than 400 gigawatts of renewable energy. Now it has set a goal for itself of setting up what were 450 gigawatts of energy by 2030. And we've already in the past decades, we've already expanded our renewable energy generation capacity multi-folds. More than 20% of our current energy generation capacity is from renewables, which is a good feat for India. And that is why it's emerging as this climate leader among all the other countries. But then again, the question is, who has the more capacity to do when the climate change debate comes in play? Of course, the developed countries. They have not only have the money, they have the resources, means, technologies to cut back their emissions immediately. Their economies are in an advanced stage. They can definitely announce that we will not emit anything beyond 2030. But are they doing so? No. They're saying we'll eventually reach carbon neutrality, net zero goal by 2050. And let me tell you, carbon neutrality does not mean that the country is cutting its emissions. It doesn't simply mean that it's cutting its emissions. It simply means that a country will absorb or offset more emissions from the atmosphere. Similar amount of emissions from the atmosphere as it's emitting. So America could just double its emission by 2040 and apply more technologies to offset it. And again, these net zero goals are also political gimmickry, because the technology, its entire goal is dependent more and more on future technologies, the future capacity of the world to apply large scale projects to suck carbon out of system. And these technologies are at very nascent stage. So we don't know what will happen in future. So these are just future goals, like you and I listen to our political leaders making in India, that we will diminish poetry, we will get rid of poverty by 2030. We don't know how. There is no specific carved out plan. So, and what these developed countries are doing, they are just announcing these far long plans and circumventing their immediate responsibilities of cutting their emissions now. They have all the means, unlike a developing country which has its own realities to attend to first. But what they're doing, they're not saying anything, they're not announcing anything. And why? Because their citizens, their people living in these countries are accustomed to live a lifestyle. And now America cannot announce that, we will, because for an America to again immediately cut back its emissions, the lifestyle changes will have to happen in its population. The energy consumption patterns, the per capita per capita emission, basically per person, the amount of carbon per person emits. India is very low in that regard. We are, of course, the third largest emitter, but when we talk about per capita emission, we're very low in the ladder. So they will have to change their lifestyle. And now, then again, it's a political suicide for these developed world to tell their citizens that you have to reduce your lifestyle. We're going to cut back on certain things. We're going to tax you for using certain things. So what they do, they apply pressure on developing countries to do more, which is again unjust. Then the next question is, what are the developed countries actually doing? Again, I think I have covered most of it. They're delaying peaking their carbon emissions. They're eating up more and more CO2 quota, which should have been meant for growing world to use to grow their economies and reach a scale where they can afford to concentrate on other issues other than their party, feeding their people. And of course, circumventing global accords like the Convention and the Paris Agreement by this net zero thing. Now, I was speaking to an expert a couple of days back. I just asked him a point blank question. Do you think that announcing net zero is a way for developed world to circumvent this principle of common but differentiated responsibility? And his answer was, sadly, it is yes. Because if all of us are doing the same goal at 2050, then it just means that India and America are standing at the same ladder. But no, historically, America is here. And in terms of its action, climate action, it should stand far above India. But what it's trying to say is that, India should stand shoulder to shoulder with us and do as much climate action as we're doing. But is India ready? Do we have that capacity? We'll address it in coming slides. Now, what can a developing country like India do to address climate change? Of course, let's first just simply talk about the challenges it has. We have large proportion of poor people in our economy, which we still need to deal with. There are no jobs. Our per capita income is very low compared to an OECD country. Our per capita emission is very low compared to an OECD country. So we need to take care of the basics of first. And of course, while we're doing so, the climate impacts are here. Droughts are happening, floods are happening, heat waves are happening. And who are these climate impacts impacting? It's the poor people. The kacha houses are being taken away by floods. Forest communities are losing their livelihoods and their villages and their houses in a forest fire. A small farmer specifically, who has very little land, is right now bearing the brunt of the climate change impacts, of the changing nature of rain patterns, the increasing temperature in summers, and the decreasing cold and the decreasing level of cold in winters. All of it is affecting its agriculture, its crop patterns, basically. And a report came, and actually a lot of reports, I don't want to name one report, a lot of reports have said that India has 50% of population which is poor, is extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Now, what have they done to deserve it? Absolutely nothing. The rich of the country, the 10% rich of the country are responsible for the 80% of carbon emissions of the world today. And the lower rungs, the latter 50% of population which is not rich, which is not well-to-do, has only caused 10% of emissions. This figure you can find in Oxfam report, in any other report that works on justice in climate change. But they are at the forefront. When you speak about I'm speaking about people from Tamil Nadu, all the coastal erosion is happening, sea level rise is happening. Who is losing their land? Coastal community, fishermen community, people living in villages. Is it impacting businesses? It has gradually now started to impact supply chain. And the conversation started, especially around COVID, because again, COVID was a zoonosis disease. It can be traced to the problem of zoonosis. And where does zoonosis come from? When you encroach more and more in the forest resources, you fell forest for your development, you are coming in touch of more and more animal species, pathogens that we have no idea about. And now these pathogens are spilling over to our community, to us in humans. And then we see COVID happening. And there's a book by Rory Gibbs, and she talks about that how COVID is just tip of the iceberg. Going forward with climate change, with forest resources, with people encroaching in forest resources, there are much more dangerous pathogens and pandemics that can come, that can unfold in this world. So that's our current reality. Now, this kind of realities are impacting businesses. So the conversation around climate change is now picking up pace, because any conversation, let's not kid ourselves, for any conversation to become political, to pick pace, it needs to affect money. The moment it affects money, you will see that politics, business will take care of it. That has started gradually happening with climate change today. Now let's come back to India. How, as a country, what are the things that India can do and is doing to address the climate change problem, or to just simply do its own contribution to the world's entire campaign of addressing climate change? It can do two things. It can the first is it can adapt, because adaptation is immediate. The poor of your country are losing their houses. You need to build climate resilient infrastructure going forward. You need to address loss and damage, all the loss that has already happened to your community. You're not accounting for it right now. Loss and damage adaptation are immediate needs. But I'll come to the politics of it. What happens is that adaptation projects are usually not good business opportunity. Whoever is investing, it's mostly government funds, mostly government budgets that are giving money to build more agriculture, to make agriculture resilient with climate change, to develop irrigation canals. It has no return. So businesses don't come and invest. The private investment never comes in adaptation. Very little so, grant parts of it. It's mostly government's own responsibility to adapt. And that's a question that is being asked again and again by civil societies, by NGOs, by all the people who work on climate justice, that what are you doing about the people who are losing their livelihoods, their homes now? That's adaptation part. Unfortunately, so it has very little money to take care of it. Now comes the mitigation part. Now, India has been able to do well. It has been able to do well among its NDCs to increase its efficiency, emission efficiency. And a simple example of it might be all the LED bulbs that you and I are using in our houses now. And 5 years back, we were using all the old school bulbs, not the LED ones, because they were costly. And India launched a campaign with EEFL, its own company, its own venture, and created demand and brought down the the cost of production for LED bulbs. And now we all only use LED bulbs, and it increases the efficiency of the country. So energy efficiency of its economy, India is in the right path. The next big good thing India has been successfully able to do is installing renewables. As I said at the start, India is doing very good in terms of establishing renewables. And these part of its actions, in climate actions, are called mitigation. Now, mitigation actions are happening very rapidly, again, because it has business aspects to it. Companies can come in, invest in renewable plants in India because it's cheap to establish a plant in India, and bank on the returns that they will get on their investment. It doesn't happen on adaptation. It happens on mitigation. So it's picking up speed. India has been able to mobilize a lot of finance around renewables. And of course, again, one tricky bit here is that you and I as journalists all have to understand that why mitigation happened? Because now the developed world also knows that for them to do global trade, they have the technology. They have cheaper technology for, let's say, for coal also, to clean coal, they have clean coal technology. They have renewable technology that now they're selling to us, the growing economies, to do our climate action. So again, even for developed countries, mitigation part of a climate action has business opportunity. So they're more interested in that. You might have been hearing that John Kerry, the climate envoy for the United States, has been here for the past 2 days, and he has announced about 3 point. He has announced that they've announced an initiative under which U.S. banks are going to probably unroll about $3.5 trillion of investment in India for it to achieve that 450 gigawatt of renewable energy goal. It's all about money. But what developing countries are asking all these developed world to do is to deliver on one promise that they made in the Convention of 1992. Again, it was repeated on Paris Agreement, that the developed world should not only provide developing countries finance, it should also provide us technology to grow our economy in a sustainable fashion. And now this climate finance is a very conflicting term. I mean, I've given 3 years of my life to understand it, and my understanding has only grown an inch. It's a very mucky debate around climate finance, because developed country wants to count all of it as climate finance, all their private investment that is coming in India. If a US company is doing a partnership with an Indian company to establish a solar plant, US will count that as climate finance, whereas it wasn't the original nature of climate finance in these two accords. Public money, US government's grants, or if they're giving India a loan, the grant equivalent part of that loan should only be counted as climate finance. Developed countries promise that they will at least mobilize $100 billion of climate finance by 2020, and they fell short in that promise. Around $80 billion they could accumulate, and even in that figure, $80 billion of figure, they were counting all of it as climate finance. It wasn't the only public part of it, public finance part of it. They were counting all the private finance, all the equity, all the investment that's coming into countries and counting it as their mobilized finance, and they called it climate finance. But that's not it. Developing countries like India, China, and the least developed countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, African countries have been asking that give us that grant equivalent money on low interest rates. That's climate finance. One of your banks simply rolling out a huge loan to us is not climate finance, because if at all, it's only pushing these smaller economies into a debt trap. So the further generations to come will only keep paying this debt to these multilateral, bilateral banks. So that's the problem with the finance part of it. Now, but of course, again, let's talk about mitigation. Mitigation actions have picked up in India. Historical limiters, of course, all the developed world promised money, but it has never come. But larger countries like China and India have realized that the money is going to come probably slowly and probably not come in required quantum, but they can't delay their own climate action. India can't delay its own climate action because its own population is getting hurt. So they're increasing their climate action. They're trying to achieve them on their own resources and doing all the kind of using all the kind of market instruments they can use to achieve that goal. As I said, 20% of renewables right now, more than 20% of its capacity is renewables. But the point now comes, if you tell India to stop using coal, comes another debate. If you stop using coal right now or by 2030, where are the jobs going to come from? A country which already has enormous numbers of people living in poverty, by removing coal completely, you're just going to take away their jobs. And you have no other sustainable jobs, green jobs that we talk about available in such quantum to just make up for the job losses that will happen if you take away coal. I've put in a simple number. India would need to scale up its current solar capacity to nearly 30 times to about 1,000 gigawatts of generation capacity if it wants to transition 500,000 people directly working in coal mines. Again, kid you me, it's the direct number of workers that are counted working with coal. The informal part of the number of people working in coal is enormous. Could be three times of this million, the 1 million number, 500,000 number that we're talking about. Where are these jobs going to come from? That's the question that India needs to answer for its own population before promising a large scale climate action like net zero, which all the developed countries are expecting India to do in the upcoming COP, which is COP26. Now again, because I'm mentioning COP, I'll just give you a simple one line. COP is this one yearly meeting where all of the countries of the world gather at one place and negotiate on their climate action and negotiate on Paris Agreement and how to implement it and the rules surrounding it. It's the most important meeting to happen about climate change in the world, across the world. So if you guys are interested in covering climate change, do keep an eye out for all the coverage that happens around COP, 26th Conference of Parties that's happening in Glasgow. It will start in October, 31st October this year. Again, now with all of these realities, if you are expecting India to move further, it will need money and technology to scale up. Now, one thing about renewable, the federal structure of India that it works with is also very interesting. We have an electricity act by central government, but eventually the implementing agencies are working under the state governments. So there is no uniformity of policies. I'll give you an example. 2 southern states, one of them started reopened their power purchase agreements with renewable developers. What did it do? It sent a signal to all the people who were investing in India in renewable energy, establishing solar or wind power plants, that state governments might not pay or might this power. So again, I'll keep giving you context. When I say power purchase agreement, bring energy to your house and my house, sign these very religious and very strict contract of buying power with a power plant, whether it is renewable or it's coal, to buy power for a longer period of time. Mostly it's 20-25 years. So this money is insured. This income for power generation companies is insured. And that's what they count in when they establish a power project. Now, if a state is, and it was a historical feat, it never happened before that the state wanted to renegotiate the power purchase agreement, but it happened for renewable. Why? Because the state realized that it has signed a contract on a higher per unit cost for renewables, and the rates have fallen. And so the state just wanted to renegotiate, say that we'll now pay you a lower amount per unit of generation, per unit of electricity generated. This is unfair. I mean, yeah, of course, it will resolve itself. Then the other southern state does all kind of trickeries to not buy power from renewable projects. Because again, renewable, they might have signed their PPAs on the higher side of per unit cost. Let's say around 3 or 4 or 5 rupees per unit. Whereas coal might just cost them 2 rupees per unit, 3 rupees per unit. So this is the political reality of a state. Now, central government can't do anything about it because it's the state subject. And when the central government goes ahead and announces these major goals to do these NDCs, major NDCs that we're now going to do 450 gigawatt of renewables, it doesn't consult states. So this political point in India needs to improve if India has to eventually reach a level where the state government and central government is working in close coordination when it comes to climate action. Because most of the major schemes, the funding that comes from central government is tied to certain central schemes. But the state needs that flexibility of using that money wherever it wants to, wherever it feels the priority should be. So this kind of flexibility in the system needs to come. So I just wanted to mention this point because it's one of the points that is becoming really important going forward in the climate debate, that state governments and central government should work in tandem. Let's go forward. So amid all of this again, I will now talk about the kind of stories that as journalists we need to do. The most important question, I think our contribution to this debate can be who is losing in this climate debate. The poor are losing. Those who don't have resources are losing. So if we can only write 4 stories a month as journalists, we better at least write 3 stories from the perspective of these people who are losing their livelihoods. I'll give you an example actually. I had taken out a couple of stories. So yeah, before I go on one specific example, so there is this website that most of you might have heard about. It's run by the iconic editor and journalist P. Sainath. It's called Pari. Go on this website, go on the search section here, and just type climate change as I have done. And you'll get range of stories. Read these stories. See, understand how journalists who are sensitive enough to bring stories of poor people who are being impacted on the daily basis by climate change are going forward with their life, are dealing with them right now. What are the problems? How to write it, how to use scientific evidence and bring it to say a story about a farmer in, let's say, Bhir or Marathwada or in Madhya Pradesh or in UP. All of them are losing. Now I'll go to another example. I'll give you one specific example. So this story is about how Raigad in Odisha, which was meant for its biodiversity rich flora fauna and the agriculture suited for that flora fauna, the cotton crop was introduced there, and how the cotton crop eventually not only started hurting the local biodiversity of that region and the historical crop patterns of that region, but it sent all these farmers in a debt trap. And fueling all of this was this background of climate change. So the nature of rainfall becoming erratic. Now, for you and I, rain in the monsoon month, rain not falling in June or July might not mean a lot. We might just say it's really hot. Why is it not raining? But for a farmer, which counts these months on its checklist because it has to take 3 crops. It depends that he will take 3 crops or 2 crops on the amount of rain it's falling. Otherwise, it's going to increase its cost because the farmer will have to buy that irrigation and it will increase its input cost. And of course, if farmers also have to time their crops accordingly. So if the rain is not falling in June and July in the required quantity anymore as it used to does in the past, people are using their crops or they're ending up investing a lot more money in buying that irrigation, buying that water from irrigation facilities, which is eventually improving their input cost and cutting their money, which is very little anyway, cutting their profit out of agriculture, which is very little anyway. And plus we have droughts, which are again not only increasing in frequency, but also increasing in intensity because of climate change. Then we have desertification. Then we have cloudbursts. All of these natural phenomena that are happening because of climate change are affecting the agriculture economy, the economy of the poor, which really are hand to mouth. which really are dependent on these daily weather patterns to make their money at the end of the month. How to write those stories is the most important part of your job and my job. I'm not going to read this story. Of course, I will share this link with Vamsi, and he can in turn share with all of you and all the other resources that I feel that as people interested, as journalists interested in climate change, you all should read. The most brilliant journalism on climate change is not being done by, let's say, mainstream media in India right now. And you can ask questions about it in the question answer right after this. It's being done by blogs, the fringe media, the media which is very little in capacity and in money. It's trying to live up to the expectation that people should have from media. Address this problem of climate change, the discourse the media needs to create, the science that media needs to translate for people to read. I will stop myself here, and we can take the rest of the entire time for question answer. I would like you guys to ask whatever it is there in your head that you want to answer from. It can be about how to secure a job in Indian media, what's the scenario in Indian media. It can be about anything. I'm just like, consider me just your colleague and ask about anything that you want to. I'll rest here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhaskar. I think we can have questions now, and whoever has questions can raise their hand. Yeah, using the function. Yeah.
Sir, there's a question from Sahana.
Yeah, Nitya, I think you're using this call on two devices. You'll have to mute one of them.
One second, sir.
There is an echo.
Now is it fine, sir?
Yeah, it's fine. Please.
Yeah. Okay. I'll read out the question. The public support of clean energy is not as absolute as the energy industry may hope for. How can the media reduce the gap between theory and practice? This is a question from Sahana, sir.
And I'm trying to understand this question better. I think it's trying to ask whether clean energy is not as absolute as the energy industry. So basically conventional energy industry. Why the support for clean energy industry is not as much in quantum as conventional energy industry. This is the question. Vamsi, am I understanding it right?
Yes.
Yeah, and how can media help in reducing this gap? Okay. I think this answer to this question would mostly depend on what we consider clean energy. For in the larger sense, for us right now, let's just assume that green hydrogen, renewables is what we're considering clean energy. So the point is that these are how the energy industry works. It's very resource centric. It depends too much on the financial resources available in the market. And how do a bank loans to you and I? It looks at our background spending, our historical spending, our credit sheet, our credit score, and lends us money in the required quantum. And sometimes if our credit sheet is not as good, or let's just say if you don't have any credit sheet, like we just enrolled with that bank, it's highly unlikely that this bank is going to give you any money because it doesn't know your financial history. Similarly, for clean energy, still, what is happening for the past 2-3 decades around the world, it's considerably very new, at very nascent stage still. The technology is evolving day by day. New technology is coming in, and so no bank that wants to lock in its investment in a technology which is evolving every day. This discussion is also true about not only about renewables, the solar plants, but also true about transport. So the investment is happening in electric vehicles, but no investment agency, no investment investor is ready enough to invest large amounts of money in the technology which is present right now. Because according to them, the market is evolving so fast that by the time they give this investment to a company to develop something, and by the time that product comes in reality, in existence, the technology might have shifted and the earlier technology which this industry invested on has become obsolete. So this is the risk. The risk factor of this investment in clean energy is why there is very little investment. It is there. I mean, it's increasing, but compared to fossil fuel industry and the conventional energy industry, it is very less in quantum. So the risk part of it is what, as I think, as journalists reporting specifically on energy and climate, it's the risk part that you and I need to write about. And probably that's how we can increase the discourse. We can get experts, speak to public representatives, speak to departments, speak to investors. What exactly are the points that are hurting investment in clean energy industry? And this is what you and I can do. Not only show the impacts it will have on the community per se, but also as it's a little niche, it's a niche world, but we do need to report on these risks. Like if somebody is giving you $100 in a loan, the person wants it back with interest. Are you capable of giving that interest back and returning that money? And what are the risks involving this debate is where I think where media can come in. But I'll tell you what, newsrooms are still stuck in the headspace that a calamity is going to happen. Climate change is going to happen. It's impacting so many lives. The conversation about climate change in the debate and the reporting around climate change is not evolving. It needs to evolve beyond a doomsday scenario. But all of us are just stuck on the doomsday scenario, and the debate is not moving forward towards a constructive discussion where we start speaking about all the other issues of the society and how climate change impacts it, about businesses and how climate change impacts it. So I think this is where this is the gap that as media people, you and I can fill in. We can't bring in investment. It's not in our hand. We can't write in a puff piece which will show an investment receiver in a good light. No, that's not our job. Our job is to probably just speak about these gaps in understanding of risk in this industry. Next question is by Priyadarshini.
Priyadarshini C.
Yeah. How can the media help in improving India's efforts for energy efficiency for better human and economic development? I think just by writing articles that translate all the technical stuff, translate all the science, the jargons of this climate change and energy world into door-to-door conversation. That's where your and my responsibility falls. Your responsibility and my responsibility is to try and understand all those jargons, but not write them forward. Deconstruct them, write them in a manner that we serve those conversations on a plate, on the dining table. As long as these discussions become part of the dining room conversations, things might not start changing, or they might change very slowly. So your responsibility and my responsibility is to communicate to people in a language and with larger platforms to make people understand why cutting their emission is good for nature, why somebody sitting, let's say I am sitting in this apartment, why I using less energy, less water, and just being sensitive of my lifestyle can be beneficial for somebody else. Just by addressing these questions and writing stories about it. Next question is by Roshni. Why should the media push community power? Why should the media push community power? Why not just leave it to the government? I don't think I clearly understand this question. Roshni, if you're here, can you just try and elaborate your question?
I think it is. I think Mr. Bhaskar, it is about why media should only just give the news to the people, and why they should also work on this community part. What is there for them, for the media to do this? Because at the end of the day, the community awareness creation is part of the government awareness, whatever it is, and as well as you say, but also on the media part, because that's what is social media. Their mode of information.
Understood.
Yeah.
No, I don't agree with this understanding that that awareness creation is government's job. Because the day you and I become journalists, it's our responsibility as well to take our message, to take the information that we are gathering to the larger media. Because end goal of journalism at the end of the day is to create informed citizens. So yes, it's government's job. Yes, it will do whatever it's in capacity, but it's your job and my job as well. And media doesn't have to push anything. I'm not saying that it's not your job or my job to help businesses say their word to community. It's your job and my job to go to the field, speak to a farmer, tell the entire country using the platform, whichever we can, that a farmer standing in the central of the India on his farm is going through this economic situation because of the climate change, or because of the energy choices that rest of the world or rest of the country is making. So we are not doing something that's not our responsibility. We actually, by doing that effort, we're precisely doing what we set out to do as journalists. Because nobody is going to go and speak to that farmer. Nobody is going to go speak to that woman who has to travel 50 kilometers extra kilometers now to fetch that water, fetch that bucket of water. Nobody is going to speak to her. Nobody is going to speak to a coal miner in an informal job and tell the business of this country, the government of this country, that you know what, you might be making your renewable choices, but these are the people you need to also take care of, because these are the ones who are going to lose their jobs and die hungry. I think it's our responsibility. And government will do whatever it can do. But you and I creating a dialogue by reporting on these stories will also push government to do more. So government's responsibility is very single focused, that it needs to do good for the community. Your responsibility and my responsibility is much more to create a dialogue. I'll stop here. Next.
We'll take last two questions.
Yeah, I can.
I think the one is between general media and social media, which one is a more reliable and helpful platform to educate the local community and prevent potential damaging misunderstandings about renewable energy projects?
I think it's a mix of both. You can't rely on any one media avenues these days, because after the 4G reaching to all people in the country and people accessing video content over their mobile phone and social media on their mobile phones, you need to reach out through all the medias possible. You need to write more and more stories in the general media, creating awareness about renewable energy projects, but also use the social media to create these debates, to engage in these debates. It will be the mix of the strategies. It can't be either or. Especially also when we talk about renewable energy projects, I just came to my mind. I just want to also throw this one question at all of you. We talk about fossil fuel energy generation projects, these power plants and these coal mines, and say that they're destroying the environment, that they were not done through the respectable process where community should have been involved in the discussion, and and how the project is going to affect the biodiversity. Those reports should have come out first. the impacts on biodiversity and community. But how many of you think that when we talk about renewable energy projects, this is being followed? Because I know for sure that large-scale renewable energy projects are following the same destructive paths of establishing these projects and land grabbing and just creating conflicts between the community and the energy projects, like the earlier one, the conventional energy projects. So just because they are green projects, should they have the power to displace communities? I mean, it's peripheral, but I just wanted to throw this question at you, and you guys should try and engage in this discussion more and more. Because it's by saying renewable energy, we're just giving this impression of green energy or renewable energy is socially aware, socially responsible. But in the process of establishing those projects, is it being responsible? Is it being aware, socially aware? Is it being inclusive of the local communities? Find out, try and find the answer.
So, yeah, one last question. Yeah, I would like to take the privilege of asking it.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Mr. Bhaskar, I think one thing what we missed, we can just take the latest IPCC report. I think one thing missed, like whatever little information I have from the media side, is putting these material in localized context will have more effect. I think because Tamil Nadu looks in news in certain way. Let's take Orissa looks news in certain way, and putting these news in an understanding manner in their own context, localized context.
Correct.
I think that should be, media should be doing more that. What do you think of it?
Yes, absolutely correct. And I would actually add to it that Vamsi, as this person who's been working on climate change, I have been trying to work more and more with organizations that are now creating training modules for vernacular journalists to train them to communicate climate change better in their own community, in their own language, with their own realities. Because what happens is that more and more we realize that climate change discussion, the world discussion is concentrated in English, to English language. And it's not reaching the vernacular press. And that doesn't mean that they're not reporting on climate change impacts, because they are talking about their farm issues, their coastal issues, their community issues, their energy issues. They are talking about it. But they just don't add that one line that all that is happening in their community could also have an impact of climate change. That discussion needs to happen. I'll give you a very simple North Indian example.
Yeah.
We don't have good vocabulary for words like electric vehicles in Hindi. Jalvayu Parivartan, we call climate change Jalvayu Parivartan in Hindi, which is very vague. It doesn't communicate anything to the people. Jalvayu Parivartan could be anything. We doesn't have a good enough vocabulary in Hindi to communicate the impacts of climate change. And I'm sure similar would be the case with other languages as well. Because earlier editors were these people in old school media, that they would come out, devise these style sheets, the words that we're going to use in our stories. They were the institution holders who were taking this responsibility and going further. About anything, about all the earlier political issues that we were facing as a country growing up forward in our economy. But right now for climate change, that discussion is missing in vernacular press. So I think not only does this discussion need to happen with journalists reporting on vernacular press with their own community realities and their own state realities, but there need to be more and more programs that are training them, that are engaging with them and helping them bridge this gap of the understanding, or just the gap of language, if not understanding. Because their understanding of climate change in their community will be way beyond than somebody sitting in Delhi or Bangalore or Mumbai. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Very well.
That is the thing that we were trying to speak about.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anchal, you can continue now.
Yes, sir. Ms. Shri Nitya, she will take note. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering all the questions raised by our participants. So this wonderful session has just come to an end. And I take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Bhaskar Tripathi for his virtual presence at this workshop. And I'm sure undoubtedly this would have been very valuable to all those who have attended this workshop today. In this regard, I would also like to thank the college management of Shri Shankarlal Sundarbai Shasun Jain College for Women, our respected Madam Principal Dr. S. Padmavati, Vice Principal Dr. S. Rukmini for their moral support and guidance given throughout this event. I wish to thank our club coordinator, Ms. Chandini, the entire team of TAG, especially Mr. Vamsi and Mr. Akanshika, who's coordinating with me, who have made this exercise a grand success. Last but not the least, I would like to thank the Almighty God for being with us throughout and blessing us in ways we cannot count on. Thank you all. Thank you. And now I call Ms. Sahana to sing the national anthem.
विनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंधु गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलति तरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाये तब जय गाता जन घन मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
Thank you, everyone.